Welcome to Lead Pods, the official leadership podcast from USMB for pastors and church leaders, where our goal is to increase our impact together.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 104 of the USMB Lead Pods. My name is Matt Erzman, and as always, so grateful that you took time to listen today, wherever you are. So today we are joined by Brian Harris. Brian, I can't believe it. I think this is his fourth time on, so Brian keeps sneaking in somehow, but so glad to have Brian back with us today. Brian is the somewhat recently appointed Southern District Minister in USMB land, so Brian spends a little bit of time as our USMB church planting mobilizer, which is maybe the last time you heard from him here on the podcast, but his role has since changed, and so today we're talking more about his role as the Southern District Minister, what that means, what does this district minister even do, what is he seeing and hearing as he's traveling around speaking to pastors, and how his ministry changed throughout his ministry career. We spend quite a bit of time talking about how we can do a better job of working together, ways that we can share resources, learn from each other, gather more regularly. We hear some of the joys and the challenges that pastors are facing today as Brian's speaking to more and more of you church leaders out there listening. We cover a lot of ground, and so I'm just so grateful for Brian and all the other district ministers in our USMB family who do the really important work of supporting our pastors and connecting us all together. You'll learn much more about that in today's episode, so let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor for today, and then we'll get to my conversation with Brian Harris.
How do you discern God's call on your life? The May-June issue of the Christian Leader focuses on God's call in the life of a believer. The featured department in the print magazine includes a reflection on the call of Moses and 2 personal testimonies about hearing the voice of Jesus. Read the May-June issue online at christianleadermag.com.
All right, friends, welcome to a new conversation I'm going to have with Brian Harris. And Brian was reminding me, Brian is coming up on being one of our most popular, most repeated guests. Is this your 4th time on, Brian?
Maybe most repeated, but not maybe most popular. Let's make sure we use our words. Yeah, this would be 4.
We wouldn't have you on 4 times if you were horrible. That's at least true. So welcome back to Lead Pods, Brian.
Good to be here.
So we're talking to you today, Brian, because your role, your position, your job has recently shifted. You were with USMB, you're still with USMB, but things have shifted a little bit since the last time we talked with you. So we'll get into some detail. But if our listeners somehow missed your first 3 appearances, which how dare they? If somehow that happened, can you just remind us, Brian, family, a little bit of background before we get too far into your new role here?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Ohio, got saved as a freshman in high school, went into Bible college and ministry. And one of the first opportunities I had was I got a packet in the mail from a church in Collinsville, Oklahoma, back in the 80s. And so I went to work for, at the time, called Westport Mennonite Brethren Church. So I was there for a while and then came back years later, 2004, to Pine Acres Church in Weatherford, Oklahoma. And so between starting there, I had 2 children who were in elementary school, and now Reagan and Macy are in their late 20s, and my wife Stephanie. We have now moved back towards Tulsa, which is Owasso, Collinsville area, and that Westport Mennonite Brethren Church is where we're back, but it's called Discovery. So that's a little quick journey of where we've been.
Nice. Awesome. So I think most recently you were on the 100th episode, or we kind of celebrated our 100th episode since you were on staff then. And before that, we talked about your role being the church planting mobilizer. So things have shifted. So if people heard about your church planting job, what happened? What are you doing now, and what caused the shift there?
Yes, so now I work as the Southern District Minister in the Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, that area. And the shift, so here's how it really happened, maybe the short version. When I was doing church planting, mobilizing work, I would sit down with the pastor and I'd get into talks about church planting and how we could work together on that. Not every case, but many cases I would be visiting with the pastor and I could tell that they were either discouraged, something was going on, and so our conversation would shift. I would kind of set aside the church planting conversation. Mm-hmm. And I just asked about what was going on, how were they doing? And when I'd go back home after many of those visits and I'd talk to my wife, Stephanie, candidly, I'd say I really enjoyed helping encourage that pastor That was the most encouraging part in those discussions. And it just gave me another warm heart towards pastors who, and not everybody is struggling, but there's always challenges in churches, the anxiety. Even if on a great day, there's still things that are weighing on a pastor. And I really enjoyed that. So when the opportunity came around last summer, I contemplated it, threw my hat in the ring, not really expecting that it would even happen. But as it turned out, I was brought on January 1st, and last 3 months have been working in that role as the Southern District Minister.
Awesome. And it's really, I think it's kind of cool because on one hand, when you were the church planning mobilizer, part of your job was to kind of pastor pastors. That's part of that role. And part of your new role as the district minister is still to work with church plants. So you're in one sense, a lot, maybe not too much has changed, but you're able just to kind of specialize more on what you're more passionate about. Is that true, or what?
Yeah, in fact, we've talked in the past about these 3 words, discover, develop, deploy, and that whole track is still operating. It just flipped them a little bit. So now the emphasis is on pastoral care and health, and the side result of that would be church multiplication, and so that develops as a result, and the area is smaller, so I'm not going from East Coast, West Coast, and all the in between. So I'm able to locate right here in the Southern District, which gives me a little bit more opportunity to go deeper with a few rather than a little thinner with a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. And we've had, I think, all the district ministers on the podcast before, so people listening and probably have at least some familiarity with that role and the responsibilities. But from your perspective, as a district minister, what's kind of the on-print job description and in day-to-day practice? What does it look like for you?
So yeah, probably the big thing is pastor to the pastors. Be a voice, be an ear to hear them, the voice to be an advocate for them, but an ear to hear what's going on in their life. And so, in fact, I've been on a listening tour for the last couple months, and we came up with a whole list of areas. Here's how I visualize the Southern District. Think of the NFL. The NFL has 32 teams. Each of those teams are owned by this owner, but they're a part of this franchise, the NFL. And there's not an outside entity that says this is what you have to do. If the 32 owners wanted to say, we want to change a field goal to be worth 20 points instead of 3. Well, that's within their prerogative as the owners. And so with the pastors and the churches, I come alongside and help coordinate, pull together the pastors and the churches for those purposes. And so I don't see myself in a role as the authority or the voice as much as the collaborator, coordinator, and that's really what I've been doing. So that's why the listening tour is important to say, okay, what's going on in each of the churches? How are people? What are the needs that we have? We've been working on that quite a bit.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure we spent a decent amount of time talking about the NFL last time you were on. So I'm learning more and more about you, Brian, that you're a football guy, which is great. I am too. It's awesome. Okay, this is maybe an ignorant question, but I've been in MB land most of my life, and I think you have too, for a lot of your, at least your career. Do other denominations have this role, or is this something that's kind of uniquely MB? Do you know, is this something that is kind of becoming more and more standard, or is this kind of a unique? I don't know.
Well, there are some that are more hierarchical. And so a bishop or a district, he would have more authority. He would have the capacity to hire and fire and those kinds of things. MBs, we're not wired that way. We're much more of a flat organizational structure. And so I think we are a bit unique in that way, in that we don't rule or have authority. It is all built on a relationship. And so if the relationships are horrible, we're not going to get anywhere. Yeah. And so you have to start with relationship, and that's where the health with the churches, between the churches and with myself and the churches and all of the organizations that we have, we've got to be able to be mutually submissive to one another to be able to serve.
Yeah. I just see so much, to me it just makes so much sense that there needs to be someone like in your position where, just coordinating people, being the support, being able to place where pastors can bounce ideas and hear what other churches are doing. I see so much value in that. So you were joking this morning before we started recording that you know the roads between Oklahoma and Kansas very well. This is an area that you're very familiar with. So as you're beginning, you mentioned you're doing this listening tour as you're driving around. I'm sure there's some churches you know super well, some that you're just getting to know. Your first, 3-4 months in, what are some of the highlights? What have stuck out to you as you're kind of beginning this position?
So I've got 10,000 miles almost since January 1st on the car.
Yeah.
So that is, I've got a lot of audiobook time, which has been great to
Podcast time, right? You don't miss an episode of Lead
That's right. That's the value. I can do that because when you have a 3-hour drive, 5-hour drive, it makes a lot of opportunity for podcast and listening and using that time wisely. I would say in this listening tour, there's been two major pieces to it. One is the individual catch-ups with pastors and just sitting down over a coffee or, for me, a Diet Coke, and asking, how are things going? What are you interested in seeing happen? But also we've been having regional gatherings. So there's a Western Oklahoma meets out in Garden City, the central Kansas, which has met up in Hillsboro, and then an Oklahoma group that has met in Edmond. And so that's where we're getting 10 to 20 people together and brainstorming and coming up with how do we want to operate and go forward. And so that has been the two ways we've been compiling our information on our direction that we are interested in collaborating together.
Yeah.
That would be one. The second piece would be the commissions, the organizational parts was over in Texas, the Lamb District in Texas with the USMB family. We had our national meetings, and so that's a little bit new, starting to work on the U.S. Board of Faith and Life. Then another part of it is with I'm now on the board of directors with Tabor. So that was new. So I had my first meeting this past February, and it felt like a little bit like a fire hose. Like, okay, I'm trying to catch all of this information, sitting in with these different commissions. And now I've been on Seek, Church Extension, for 15 of my 18 years when I was pastoring. That one I was very familiar with. I still sit on that, but the rest of them I didn't have as much connection to and wasn't as familiar. So those were new pieces.
Okay, cool. And you have obviously a lot of experience. You were a pastor for, 15, 18?
So I was 18 years at Pine Acres. Prior to that, I was church planter in Ohio and had an associate role and youth roles prior to that.
Okay, so you've been in ministry a very long time. And I guess one of my questions for you was, since you've been around for a while, I think when I talk to pastors, even pastors at my church, and no one's having like a existential crisis, but it's a hard time to be a pastor, I think. Cultural issues are difficult. Post-COVID stuff's difficult. Right now, a lot of places finances are tight. It's just a hard time to be a pastor. But I think we're also just naturally, we kind of have recency bias a little bit where we're so focused on right now, we kind of forget what it was like 5, 6, 17, 18 years ago. What would you say, since you've been around for a while, is now kind of uniquely hard time to be a pastor, or is it always hard just in different ways? Or for you personally, and as you're meeting all these pastors, how would you answer that?
So the biggest change, I think, is if you go back 25 years ago, the 40-year-old 25 years ago is now 65. That 40-year-old was typically very committed to the church. And I'm talking across denominations across the country, not just in the MB. So now that 40-year-old who's 65, he's been replaced by the new 40-year-old. That new 40-year-old is not nearly as engaged as those 25 years ago. And I can see the future in a way, because in 10 to 15 years, that 65-year-old is going to be 75, 80 years old. And as it shifts, the loyalty and commitment to church starts to wane. And so you're having to work extra hard to develop those leaders because they don't naturally pop up. So I read, it's an interesting book. It was specifically on the Southern District. It was a history from 1910. It concluded in 1990. But in that book, I could just see the arc of there was a huge commitment with these folks who had come from Europe, and they were tight-knit. Getting together for a convention was incredibly important. And then as the decades moved on, that tight connection got a little looser. And so today we're at a point where many of our churches, the congregations really aren't familiar even that we're a Mennonite Brethren church.
Yeah.
Because it's because they just didn't grow up. Now we're having to rethink. It used to be maybe we are Mennonite Brethren because we have a heritage. Now that heritage is still there, but the people coming in, they don't have that same historical experience.
Yeah.
So we have to re-engage and say, why do we still work together? And it's the relationships for all the things like, what are we going to support? How are we going to train? How are we going to encourage each other? How are we going to protect the faith? These areas are big. And I just think that over the last 25 to 50 years, it has gotten harder because the loyalty to denominations or even church itself is lower.
Yeah.
So that makes it hard for a pastor.
Right. So again, you're just a few months into this. What's the response? How can we, if that's the kind of the cultural reality that we're facing, what do you see moving forward? How can we get better at that? Or is that just reality we have to get used to? Or what are you, again, you're early on in this, but what are your thoughts?
Well, I do think it's just the reality that's there, but there are some ways to work with this. So it's going to require sacrifice, and that sacrifice is usually going to be of time and energy and finances to say it's worthwhile getting together.
Yeah.
Because Church A can say, hey, we're going to do all of our stuff over here, and Church B that's way over here says, oh, we're going to do our stuff. But we're having conversations about how can we do all of these things, some of these, not everything, but some things better together. Yeah. And so really that's part of this listening tour, saying what are the big rocks that we can join together and do together that will be beneficial. But it takes time and energy and resources to make that happen. For instance, our training, how do we train up young leaders? And the conversation has popped up, well, we could probably do that a little bit better together. So and the relationship and the fellowship. So one of the things, and I know we probably touched on this in past podcasts, but across the country, leaders have not been developed within their own denominations, and so they've reached outside to other denominations to steal the fruit from those orchards. Well, now every denomination pretty much has picked the fruit dry. There's not much out there. And so we're forced to come back and say, well, we're going to have to do this ourselves. We're going to have to, the Mennonite brethren are going to have to raise them up from within our MB family. We can't put our statement out there to the Southern Baptist or the Evangelical Free or the PCA or whomever it is and say, well, they've got some extras. We'll just take it from there. We're going to have to develop from within. And that's probably one feature that is a positive that everyone said, well, we're not quite sure how to do that, but if we work and team up together, we can pull this off. So that's a strength that could be out of a weakness.
I think it's one of the, just again, like you said, it's just kind of a reality because also historically we are a smaller denomination. So it kind of makes sense just numerically, we're going to have fewer leaders to choose from than compared to some other denominations. So I think some people maybe are hesitant when we maybe cast a wider net or we do hire outside of the MB families or, when I work at Ridgepoint, we got some flack for changing our name. All along, we said our goal for changing our name is for us to have more Mennonite brethren. We want more people to come into our family. We're not ashamed. We're trying to get more, right? So I think that's part of the wrestling tension we're feeling is as a smaller denomination, as we're figuring out how to widen the gates but still keep what's distinctively MB, that's going to be just a messy road for all of us. Would you agree? Is that kind of the tension you're feeling?
Yeah, because in that book I read, it was in 1942, they finally changed the convention minutes out of German into English.
Oh, wow. And
so that was probably a big change. We're changing, we're going to adapt. Much like a church today might say, well, we're going to change our name from Mennonite Brethren to Ridgepoint or whatever. they were experiencing the need to react to the changing culture.
Yeah.
And there's no simple answer to that, but they felt, hey, in 1942, it was time.
Yeah.
And I think we're at another one of those stages over the last 10 years or so where we can see, hey, the culture has radically shifted, and and the curve is much faster, I think, than what has been previously. Maybe that's one of the biggest changes. It used to feel like it's a slow grade. Now it feels like it's accelerated.
Yeah.
And so churches are a little bit, okay, we're trying to figure this out in a thoughtful pace, but the culture isn't waiting on us, and so we're having to make decisions.
Yeah.
And that makes it hard. So I understand both sides, but there's no doubt we are in a new day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of that, so you're just a few months in, but as you're talking to pastors and leaders, you've hinted at this already, but what are the things that are top of mind of pastors? How are you able to, or what are you hearing, and what are you able to kind of encourage them as you're meeting with these leaders?
So in those visits, I wrote down quite a stack of things that they told me. So on the area of how do we work together? First one was, what do we need to be supporting? And the support of the mission, it came into, we got to be working hard with our youth and with our camps. Church planting was obviously high up on that list. Our missions, how are we going to support missions? There was a big emphasis on how do we encourage the small church, because the Mennonite Brethren are unique in a lot of ways that we have started churches in rural communities, and so we still have a lot of churches in rural areas. So some of the larger churches are saying, how can we help share resources? And other churches that are small, they say, well, there's 5 or 6 of us that are very small, but we can do certain things together. So those were the how to support. That was the first one that came in. The second one we found a lot of emphasis and focus on was training harvest workers. Now, this doesn't surprise us because we've been in this conversation for about a year and a half. That Luke 10:2 passage about, we have to pray that we have more workers for the harvest. And so in that list, there were things like new educational opportunities, residencies, workshops, cohorts, lay leader training. And that has taken a lot of energy and time to work through that. Then we shifted to a third area, and that was how do we encourage pastors? And the things that came up on that list were we have to be praying for each other, and that really fell into almost every category. But we need fellowship. A lot of pastors said, I feel like I'm alone out here, but when we got those regional gatherings, it was a breath of fresh air. Okay, I've got somebody who I can bounce things off of, and so we need the family for the encouragement there.
Yeah.
And another one that was very interesting, it was new to me, I didn't really think about it. Somebody mentioned at one of the meetings, advocacy. So a pastor who said, the congregation doesn't understand what it's like to be a pastor, which we understand that, they're not. But could you advocate? Because it's very hard if a pastor has, for instance, his salary is not commensurate to what he needs.
Yeah.
Could there be an advocate to come alongside and say, here's the needs that are before your pastor? So, and it wouldn't be just in the financial area. It could be time, sabbatical, various features like that. And we also touched on that it's not just the lead pastors who need that encouragement, children's workers, worship leaders, youth, all of those. And so how do we make sure we're investing in those?
Yeah.
And then the last area, which was maybe a bit more surprising, is the pastors started talking about just how do we protect the faith from going off the rails. And so things like licensure requirements from the pastor saying, maybe we need to have some more clear licensing requirements of here's what we are expecting. So if you're going to be one of those 32 owners, you have something invested and say, this is what we're about. Continuing ed fell into that. Local study conferences were another thing that came up quite often in the conversations. How do we have national study conferences like we had the peacemaking and the women in ministry, but what about making some of those at a local level first where we can talk about them and then go to the broader MB family? So that's the list that I printed up after 3 months.
Nice. And of course, as a good pastor, you have an acronym. So
yes,
STEP.
STEP.
Nice. So support the mission, train harvest workers, encourage pastors, and protect the faith. I like it. Way to go. You can't let you got to have a 4-point acronym, right? Like it's not a legit plan.
It could have been pets, I suppose, but STEP worked better.
I like that better. That's good. So obviously, as we're talking, one of the biggest, if maybe not the biggest, benefit of being in a denomination is that you're able to work together, right? You've mentioned that several times already. You can pool resources, you can train together, you can share resources, you can learn from each other. You've also mentioned, and I've heard this from other MB leaders too, that we have a lot of churches in our denomination who, for whatever reason, they're kind of hesitant to be very involved. They don't send their kids to the camps. They don't go to the conventions. Maybe they don't support financially, whatever. There's kind of, for some churches, there's a hesitancy to kind of go all in on this. If someone is in that position, I'm sure they have reasons for that, of course. What if someone is kind of hesitant to go all in? How are you, of course, gently and encouraging them to jump in more? What are you saying to those pastors?
Yeah, and I think one of the common root problems in that is the perspective is that they aren't one of the owners. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that because they'll maybe say something like, you guys, as if, well, I'm not one of you guys. Or they'll say, what is the conference or what is the district going to do about X, Y, or Z? Mm-hmm. And I've said, well, you are the district. You are the conference. Yeah. You are one of those owners as one of our MB churches. And so if there's things that you would like to see changed or tweaked, you have full voice at this table. We invite you to have that because that's part of the beauty of this is it's not one voice speaks and my voice is not the one to speak and say, this is the way things have got to go. Mm-hmm. And so that invitation to sit at the table and for many to say, not only do you have a voice, you have gifts that you could utilize that we need. Yeah. Your training that you've had, some may have gifts in shepherding, others in the areas of preaching, others in technology, whatever that church could bring to the table, we can have a clearinghouse. I almost think of it to change the NFL, you can use it as a co-op. Mm-hmm. And here's this co-op, and we're going to come together with our resources. As I have those conversations and say, your voice is important, you are already an owner of this ministry, we want you at the table. That's my approach where I want you to take this.
Good. And along with that, you kind of mentioned this earlier too, but I think it's a good point that I think your primary job is to connect with all the lead pastors, the senior leaders, but you brought up a great point earlier that we also have kids ministers and we have youth workers and worship leaders and administrative staff and prayer ministries. Like there's a lot of our churches have a lot, maybe they're not on staff, but they have a lot of leaders who are also very instrumental in their ministries. So I know that's not really probably your primary job to connect with those people, but I like the idea of our children's pastors and our youth pastors being able to work together and collaborate. So is that something, how can we do that better? It's not just lead pastors, right? It's everybody.
Well, right. In fact, Russ Clausen, who's the Southern District Youth Minister, he and I were just visiting yesterday, and I said, we have to keep ideas of collaboration even across lines. So let's take his youth commission, and there's a pipeline of young people that he's working with. Well, then you have the church planting Seek group that is another commission. Usually that's thought of as disconnected from the youth. But I've said, what if there was a partnership between Seek and Youth Commission to start dreaming? So if we're wanting to train up harvest workers, and that's what one of the themes from Seek would be, well, why would we want to do that in isolation from what Russ and the Youth Commission is doing? So having perhaps a joint meeting of youth and Seek to come together and have a conversation. So that'd be one way of that. And really, there is a line that goes. The best, whatever program, football, baseball, wrestling, if you go to a great high school, inevitably you're going to see the Pee Wee League in that community has been strong. And if they have that, it's going to feed right up through. So we really do take that back to the children's ministry and say, okay, how do we have a strong children's ministry that feeds into a strong youth ministry? that then has an opportunity to find harvest workers who are ready to get trained up.
Yeah.
It all has to work together.
Yeah.
And then I'll even add one extra piece. There is a group that I would call the Caleb Club, the Caleb generation. If there's a passage, it doesn't strike me right now, but it talks about when Caleb was 85 years old, he was strong and ready to go. And I think we're missing an opportunity with those who are in their pre-retirement or retirement ages to say, hey, we could train up this group to go into ministry, to take off and do amazing work. So it's a line that goes across from the youngest to the oldest.
Yeah. Awesome. That's great. I love that. And again, we have probably a lot of pastors listening, but I know we also have lay leaders or volunteers. We have all kinds of people listen. You mentioned earlier that a lot of pastors maybe just need some encouragement. Maybe there are things that lay people just don't understand about day-to-day life of being a pastor. So if someone listening is a lay leader, a volunteer, or a tender, what do they need to know? As you're talking to all these pastors, what do you wish that more congregation members just knew?
Probably the number one thing is these pastors are genuinely, because I've talked to these fellas, and they genuinely have a love for the church. And their vision is a little bit in tension because there's the care for the congregation that exists, and then there's the care for the vision of those who aren't a part of the congregation yet.
Yeah.
And a pastor just faces that tension constantly.
Yep.
We're trying to reach those, because the church is really the one entity that's designed for not for the members, but for those who aren't the members.
Right.
And so you're trying to balance, how do I encourage the membership that exists with those who aren't? And if a member of a congregation can at least understand that's part of the tension. It's not that the pastor is trying to say, I don't care about those of you who are here. It's that there's a delicate balance. And so sometimes changing worship styles can be a very difficult road to hoe.
Yeah.
But just to understand, you don't have to agree with all the changes, but to understand this is not a man who is trying to undermine the
sabotage.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would probably be, if that one thing were understood, I think it would go a long way.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, Brian, our time, as always, going fast. We've kind of been focusing on the pretty big picture. USMB, Southern District, we've kind of been up there. Let's bring it down. I want to hear a little bit more about you, Brian. I want to hear you've talked about this a little bit, but what are you super excited about? As you've been in here, what gets you really pumped up? Or on the flip side, what's really hard about being a district minister? I want to hear that too. I want to hear the pros and cons. You mentioned you've already put thousands of miles on your car in a few months. It's a lot of travel. What's the high point? What's the low point now that you're getting settled?
Well, I'm going to use one thing, and it can be both.
Okay.
Because I think the collaboration of all of these entities will work to make this a better conference.
Yeah.
And to give you an example, I think we have an opportunity right now to do some training, some certificate level training, and even partnering with the Central District and working with Tabor College and saying, how do we do this? That would also require relationships that are healthy and collaborating with the youth, the churches that are out there that have adults who are interested in this. How does Multiply connect with that as well? So all these elements that we've got a lot of pieces in our MB puzzle.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it tends to silo out and say, we're going to do our thing, we're going to do our thing, we're going to do our thing. And I'm not asking that we do everything together. We're just one conglomerate of clay. But there are a handful of things that we can do really well together. And so it takes a ton of effort to do that, because you have to make extra phone calls and extra touches to say, okay, wait a minute, did we think about this group over here? Did we think about that group over there?
Yeah.
So the beauty is when you have buy-in from a vast number, you have a really amazing potential.
Yeah.
But it's also the frustration, because it has to be slower. It has to be more methodical and say, okay, wait a minute, we can't just race on ahead with our idea. We need to get buy-in from many spheres.
Yeah.
So I would say that would be, and this is really flowing right out of the church planting mobilizer. When I went in naively thinking we're just going to deploy workers, and then, we haven't developed, but we haven't even discovered a lot of people. So we have to start way back there and say, let's go into the churches, let's discover people who want to go into ministry, and then how do we work together? Because there's some churches would say, I can really help in an area of shepherding, but they don't have language skills. Hey, is there somebody out there who could help with rudimentary Greek or Hebrew?
Yeah.
Just areas that I don't have. Somebody else who says, hey, you know what? Knowing church history is very valuable. This is the great thing. We've got pastors who have knowledge and skills in almost every one of these areas. Mm-hmm. And so which I'm not, a Greek scholar, not even a Greek low-level guy, right? But I would benefit from having the connection with those who do. And we put all those pieces together. Mm-hmm. That is both a really exciting thing, but it's a challenging thing at the same time.
Yeah. Yep. That's awesome. Well, I think, again, I just see so much value in the role. So I guess as we're wrapping up here, if people are in the Southern District, hopefully they know you, they know how to track you down. I mean, it's probably possible we have somebody listening who doesn't even know who their district minister is. Right. So if someone listening, maybe they're in touch with their minister all the time. Maybe they have no idea who that person is, how to contact them, how to take a next step. So if someone listening likes what you're saying, whether they're in your district or not, how can they kind of take a next step of engagement?
Yeah, so I would give you my email, which would be an easy way to catch up. Brian with an I. The Y is the wrong spelling, by the way. Brian with an I, sdcmb.org. So it stands for Southern District Conference, Mennonite Brethren.org.
Awesome. And then, again, if they're in a different district, I'm sure they're on the USMB website. Is that the best way? Just get in touch with USMB and figure out next steps?
Yes.
Cool. Awesome. See, we mentioned, Brian, you're going to be traveling all over the time, all over the place. Obviously, your family is very important to you. I know your local church is important to you. So, again, I think it's kind of a blessing and a curse of this job. You get to see all the cool things, meet a lot of cool people, be on the road. That's hard too, right? So how are you going to balance all that? Is that a struggle for you?
It is a struggle. I was used to, when I was pastoring for 18 years, in one town, maybe, travel 5 miles was the typical type of day. And now traveling so much. So my home church, Discovery, I'm there twice a month, maybe. What I've been trying to do is stay at least connected. So I teach 4th and 5th graders on Wednesday nights. So I try to get back by a Wednesday or leave on a Thursday to keep that connection.
Yeah.
And I just saw one of my 4th graders just a Sunday, and he was walking in the hallway, and I thought, I missed last week's meeting and felt really bad. So I'm trying to find some way to have some grounding in Owasso. At the same time, this job doesn't work if you're not. Zoom is fine for some things, but there's not. If you're not eyeball to eyeball with somebody, it just doesn't go. So I don't like the idea of, I'm just going to office out of Oklahoma and everybody, we can Zoom conversation. It's harder. It's a little bit more expensive, but I think it's better.
Yeah.
And so those clusters. And so I have got a solution to that. It's just the way it's going to be. Mm-hmm. I do know that there are times where my wife, Stephanie, will come with me. She's also learned, Kansas is a large state with a lot of open spaces in it. And so we are in a stage where we can do a little bit more of that. Our kids are grown and out of the house. So this probably would be a harder job if I had a 3rd grader and a 6th grader, something like that.
Yeah.
But it is still, there's no simple, easy answer. If there was, somebody would have already told me.
That's true. Well, Brian, thanks for your time today. And obviously, again, 4th time on, we'll see you the 5th time. I don't know when that's going to be, but people listening want to go back and listen to your other conversations. You've been super great to talk to today. So thank you for your time today, but also for your service in all these different roles and this new role. I'm grateful for you serving in this and excited to hear all the stories coming out of the Southern District. So thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to Brian for his time this week on another episode. And man, at this rate, it probably won't be much longer until we talk to him again. This guy just keeps coming back. So Brian, thanks for your time and for all your service and through your ministry. And to those of you listening, I encourage you to kind of take some time to think about what Brian talked about here, mostly about how we can work together and help each other in ministry. I think that's such an important goal that we should all be working toward and striving towards. So if you are at a church that doesn't currently engage with your district minister or USMB events and conferences and things like that, I encourage you to at least think about it and put aside some time to think about ways that you might be able to serve and give back, or on the other hand, take advantage of the resources that USMB offers, because there's a lot of really good stuff out there that we can share and do together. So I really do encourage you to spend some time thinking about that, take advantage of those resources, get in touch with your district minister, and I think there's a lot of good things that can come out of that. As we wrap up here, it's the end of May, school's wrapping up, summer's around the corner, and again, convention's not too far away, the USMB convention that's happening in Omaha, end of July. I'm actually really looking forward to it. I know a bunch of you will be there. I look forward to seeing you there, hopefully. So if you haven't yet, I again encourage you to check out usmb.org and get signed up. Check out all the different workshops and the speakers that are going to be there. It's going to be a really great week together in Omaha, so I encourage you to check that out. All right, so once again, thanks so much for listening. Have a great week ahead, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time here on Lead Pods.
Thanks for listening to Lead Pods. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our show wherever you're listening today. Learn more by visiting usmb.org, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time as we learn more practical tools to increase our impact together.